Hello everyone! Welcome to the first week's lecture, Introduction to Epidemiology. It will cover key points within these 4 broader topics. This video is intended to supplement the other readings and videos assigned for this week and emphasize the major take-homes. The first is that this class will focus on epidemiologic methods in the field of public health. This means that we will learn how to collect and analyze population-based data. Epidemiology has been defined various ways over the years. Sometimes people mix up what epidemiologists do with what healthcare providers or lab scientists do. So I want to take this opportunity to clarify epidemiology's focus on populations, not individuals. Healthcare providers ask the question, what made this person get this disease at this time? For example, why did this person develop high blood pressure at this point in their life? Epidemiology, on the other hand, asks, what made this population sick at this time? For example, this graph shows the distribution of systolic blood pressure in 2 populations of middle-aged men. The first is Kenyan nomads, who have an average systolic blood pressure of about 120, and no one in the population has a higher systolic blood pressure than 160. The next population is composed of London civil servants, so basically men with desk jobs, and they have an average systolic blood pressure of about 130, and you can see many of them have systolic blood pressures of up to 200. Based on what we see here and what we know about these populations, we can hypothesize about population-level factors that are influencing this distribution. That is, what sort of differences are there across the board between Kenyan nomads and London civil servants? For example, the average amount of salt each person in these societies consumes, or the average amount of exercise they get. This brings us to the definition of epidemiology we will use for this class. Epidemiology is the study of the distribution and determinants of health issues in populations and the application of this study to promote and protect public health. I like this definition because it makes clear that epidemiology studies populations. I also like this definition because it specifies epidemiology's 2 major goals: to study the distribution of health issues and to study the determinants of health issues. Now that we've talked about epidemiology's focus on populations, let's talk about the first goal of epidemiology: to collect data on the distribution of health issues. Distribution refers to the way health issues are patterned in populations by person, place, and time. Person variables describe who has the health issue. A person variable is an identifying characteristic shared by a group of people such as age, sex, or race ethnicity. Keeping track of disease rates in different populations allows us to identify disparities between groups. Next, place variables. Where is the health issue occurring? We can define place as a large area, like a country, or a smaller area, like a state, county, city, or even school or workplace. Comparing differences between places can help us identify things like food deserts or where certain health services are most needed. Finally, time variables. When is the disease occurring? How is it changing over time? Keeping track of how health issues change over time can help us identify historical trends and forecast what will happen in the future. Collecting data on the distribution of health issues helps epidemiologists identify disparities and monitor trends. It also helps us form hypotheses about the causes of these differences. This brings us back to the definition of epidemiology. The second goal of epidemiology is to identify the determinants of health issues. Determinants are causes. There are several different words for determinants. They might be called exposures. Determinants that are harmful to health might be called risk factors. Determinants that promote health might be called protective factors. Determinants are anything that impacts health. This includes biological, genetic, and social determinants. Now that we've discussed how epidemiology studies the distribution and determinants of health issues in populations, I'd like to talk about the role of epidemiology in the field of public health. The process of how public health gets done can be broken down into 4 steps. Epidemiology plays a role in each one. The first step is to define a health problem. Based on health data that are continuously being collected around the world, epidemiologists can identify problems by looking for inequitable distributions. This graph shows the infant mortality rate in 2020 and 21 in the United States for 6 different groups based on maternal race and Hispanic origin. We can see that infant mortality was much higher in 3 of these groups. Epidemiologists can also identify problems by looking at changes in the frequency of a health issue. In 2014 and 15, a mosquito-borne virus new to the United States began to emerge, Zika virus. Because epidemiologists were monitoring diseases like Zika virus, they were able to detect the outbreak. An outbreak is a higher than usual number of cases in a given place within a given time period. Technically, the word outbreak and epidemic mean the same thing, but we usually use the word epidemic to describe an outbreak that has spread over a larger area. Related to epidemic are the words endemic and pandemic, and endemic disease is one that is usually present at some constant level or seasonal level in a specific place. For example, Zika is endemic in South America. A pandemic is an epidemic that has spread to many countries or continents. For example, COVID-19. The next step in the process is to identify determinants of the problem. What is causing the problem? What exposures are protective? What exposures put people at increased risk? It was already known that Zika is transmitted by mosquitoes, but if the source of infections was unknown, epidemiologists would conduct an outbreak investigation. In this case, epidemiologists might conduct studies to see what kind of modifiable determinants are associated with Zika transmission. For example, sleeping with a bed net, or eliminating sources of standing water, or spraying for mosquitoes. After epidemiologists have completed step 2 and identified determinants of the problem, they would help other public health practitioners develop and test community-level interventions to control or prevent the problem. In the definition of epidemiology, this is referred to as application. For example, in Step 3, epidemiologists might recommend mosquito spraying programs for communities without them, if in Step 2, epidemiologists had determined these programs were protective against Zika. The final step in the process is to assess the effectiveness of interventions. If epidemiologists recommended mosquito spraying, they might assess its effectiveness by looking at the incidence of Zika before versus after this intervention was implemented. So that's how epidemiology fits into the process of public health. Epidemiology is the science behind identifying health problems and controlling or preventing them. Finally, I'd like to touch on epidemiology as a career. Epidemiologists are public health workers who, as you already know, investigate patterns and causes of disease and injury. Epidemiologists work in offices, usually at health departments for state and local governments, in hospitals, and at colleges and universities. At the federal level, many epidemiologists work for the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is in Atlanta. In terms of education, epidemiologists typically need at least a master's degree. Many have doctoral degrees. Here's a table of some facts from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. One of the most notable things is the job outlook. Employment of epidemiologists is projected to grow 27% from 2022 to 2032, much faster than the average for all occupations. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Bye-bye!